Mr. Land, hi, I'm Bob McEwen from the Fifth Estate at CBC News. We'd like to talk to you about Joan Lawrence and the others who disappeared. I think you know that the Ontario Provincial Police have been investigating you over the years. They believe Joan Lawrence was the victim of a first-degree murder, and they believe you and your uncle Ron Allen are the suspects. You never reported them missing. Mr. Land respectfully declines our request for an interview.
Joan Lawrence was 77 when she went missing in 1998. Joanne's disappearance would ignite an investigation revealing the disappearance of 3 other seniors from Huntsville, Ontario. Through the investigation, stark cases of fraud, theft, and elder abuse would be revealed, shaking up the small town and leaving a black mark on the beautiful Muskokas. The town of Huntsville is located roughly 2.5 hours north of the city of Toronto. It is located on the Canadian Shield and is part of Ontario's Muskoka region, a region largely known for its provincial parks, nature, and cottage country. Joan Lawrence was born in 1921 and originally came from Ottawa, Canada's capital city. Late in her life, Joanne decided to make the move to Cedar Pines Christian Retirement Lodge, an endeavor owned by the Land family, in 1997. Later that year, Joanne decided to move on to a property privately owned by 3 of the Land brothers, David, Walter, and Paul, where she paid $600 to $700 a month in rent for a shed. When I say shed, I mean shed. Seen on screen, it was uninsulated with no water, heat, or electricity. Largely, it was believed to be a choice of hers, as she reportedly had 30 cats to take care of and could live nowhere else. This is a bit of a sad shame, because the lodge was located on Siding Lake, a pretty lake, and today it is home to many high-end cottages. Those that knew Joanne said that she had actually been in the process of reporting the Land family for the poor conditions, among other things, at the lodge. These other things included pension check fraud. In 1998, a social worker flagged the conditions of the Land family to authorities. In turn, Adult Protective Services was notified and began working to find Joanne another home. In September of that year, both the police and the fire chief would attend the land property and discovered the poor conditions that Joanne was subject to. While they were aware that social workers were attempting to find Joanne another place of residence, they encouraged the Lands to move her into a slightly better accommodation. In turn, she was located to an abandoned van on the property as a quote-unquote upgrade. The van can be seen on screen now, and I'll let you decide if this was truly an upgrade. It was only 2 months later that Joanne would be reported missing. In November of 1998, 57-year-old Alan Marshall, who also lived on the farm, reported the disappearance. Alan indicated to police that he had heard gunshots and later saw a backhoe being operated on the property. This sparked the involvement of the Ontario Provincial Police, where 28-year-old detective Aaron Burke was assigned to investigate the disappearance. While young, Burke had been an officer for 6 years and had previously worked a murder. In 1996, which was the first murder in Huntsville in nearly 10 years. Burke never believed Joanne was anywhere else but the farm and focused her efforts there. In December, the police had obtained a warrant, and while they did not find Joanne's body, they did discover that 6 or so of Joanne's cats had been shot It was later in the investigation that Ron Allen, an uncle to the Lands, claimed responsibility for the deaths of the cats. Early in the investigation, it was found that Ron Allen, who had killed Joanne's cats, was often seen with Joanne around town, acting as her driver to allow her to pick up mail and run errands. Ron also lived in the house next to Joanne's shack on the property. Digging into Joanne's finances, police discovered that the Lands had a joint bank account with her. And it turned out that the last time her account was accessed was when she disappeared. A debit card was utilized at the Canadian Tire in Bracebridge. This was 30 kilometers away from the lodge. Those who knew her seemed to think it was unlikely she would have gone this far, as she hadn't been more than 10 kilometers away from the retirement community in the past decade or so. More suspiciously, Joanne had never had a card in her name for the account, and the only card tied to that account was for David Land. Joanne's latest tax return check was also missing. A local employee at a law firm had been trying to help Joanne track it down as a favor. When interviewed, the unnamed employee seemed to have found evidence that the return was stolen and told Joanne to come in and collect the papers with that evidence. However, Joanne never showed up to collect them, despite her eagerness to do so. It was here where Burke believed that David Land and Ron Allen had conspired to murder Joanne. Police talked to over 50 people, conducted more than 7 searches, including a helicopter search, a dog search, and an underwater search, and grilled several suspects in the area, and conducted hours upon hours of surveillance of the Land Lodge. Unfortunately, Joanne was never found, and no one was charged. It would take 2 years until a break in the case was discovered. And this discovery came in the form of finding that more seniors at the retirement lodge had gone missing. 90-year-old John Semple, 71-year-old John Crofts, and 70-year-old Ralph Grant had also gone missing. However, despite their disappearances, their pension checks had still been arriving at the lodge, and more interesting, they were being cashed. Police had actually spoken to Grant during the initial investigation, and this was actually the last time anyone could reliably attest to seeing him alive. The Lands never reported any of these disappearances. At this point, all 4 of the Lands would be charged with pension fraud and theft of money from the residents. Catherine Land, who is the actual owner of the land property, had also been charged with embezzling money from the Muskokas Christian School and was sentenced to 9 months in prison. Paul and Walter Land received sentences that included probation and community service. Paul was given a restitution order to pay back more than $20,000 and Walter more than $10,000. The charges against David Land were withdrawn, but none of them went to jail. Sadly, this case sits unresolved even to this day. While it is likely that Detective Burke's suspicion of David and Ron were correct, the investigation made no progress following the theft charges. Police did shut down the Land's lodge, and the Lands separated to pursue other paths. 22 years later, a podcast would spark the only press conference on the topic the police ever issued. At this point, Burke had been reassigned, and a new lead detective, Rob Matthews, was in charge of the case. While we cannot know for sure, it seems likely that the 4 murders went unpunished. I personally find this shocking, and once again scratch my head at how this can just be left with so much obvious evidence on the table to pursue it further. We will likely never see a punishment for this case, although there is no statute of limitations for murder in Canada. You know, it's a bit of a shame to think about it. The Muskokas are one of Ontario's most beautiful regions. and anyone local to the area who's gone camping there just knows how amazing it is. And looking at the pictures of the lodge, this looks like a dream property and somewhat of an amazing idea, especially now when you think of retirement. You think of old age homes or assisted living facilities where they're just apartments. But to retire somewhere as scenic and nice and relaxing as cottage country would be quite amazing. But as we can see, it's dangerous. And this was dangerous in a time before there was any guiding document for the old age and retirement living. It wasn't until 2010 that any kind of legislation would come into place. And this came in the form of the Retirement Homes Act of 2010, which required any operators of a retirement home to actually be licensed under the Act before being able to open it. Something that probably would have prevented the disappearances of all 4 of these seniors. So thank you again for watching as we continue to explore some of Canada's mysteries, disasters, and other historical events.